Alan and Richard Rosen and David came to us saying that they wanted to create a working group to develop the core principles of the new economy. And this actually grew out of a very practical problem, which is that there was a research project having to do with messaging and communication around the new economy. And it became, very necessary to say, well, what is the new, what is part of the new economy and what isn't? Is traditional labor organizing part of the new economy? Is, stopping a dam in Patagonia, is that part of the new economy? Does it have to be all three? Does it have to be democracy, social justice, and environment, or can it be just one of them? And this, of course, was an interesting problem for the network, too, as we were growing, to say, well, what are we? We have this notion of the new economy movement, but do we actually understand what it means, and are there boundaries? So we really welcomed this work, and we were very excited that we got, I think, some really important people to work together to create these principles. So I just want to draw your attention to the last page of your handout, where you can see, everyone from Gar Alperowitz at the Democracy Collaborative, John Kavanagh at the Institute for Policy Studies, John Fullerton from the Capital Institute, Peter Brown from McGill University, Neva Goodwin, who was a key driving force and one of the editors of the process, Richard Heimberg from the Post-Carbon Institute, David Corton from the New Economy Working Group at IPS, and of course Bali and Yes and other networks, Asher Miller from Post-Carbon, Noel Ortega from IPS, Richard Rosen, who was also a key driving force and one of the editors, Gus Speth, the father and grandfather of the New Economy movement, myself as kind of a participant and an administrative assistant to the process, Stuart Wallace, and Alan, again, one of the editors. So we're really happy to share what this group has created and talk to you about both the process of creating the principles, the content, some of the response and feedback that we got from people all over the world, and why the principles are important and how we can use them. So first, you will be hearing from Alan White. And Alan is a senior fellow at TELUS. He directs the program on corporate redesign there. He was a co-founder of the Global Reporting Initiative in 1997 and was the CEO of the Global Reporting Initiative until 2002. In 2004, he founded and now is the director of Corporation 2020, an initiative involved in designing future corporations to create and sustain social mission. He has an illustrious academic credentials, and he's the co-author of Corporate Environmentalism in a Global Economy. Soledad is the founder and executive president of ProHumana Foundation, which is a nonprofit Chilean think and do tank, promoting good practices in fostering sustainable and integral human development with an emphasis on corporate and citizen responsibility. She's active in philanthropy, corporate social responsibility, marketing with a social focus, social investment, participation in networks, and education for democracy. Before her work at ProHumana, Sol was the executive secretary of Amnesty International in Chile and has been a consultant for national and international organizations and foundations. And finally, to talk about how we can use these principles to really build the power and advance the new economy movement, we have the New Economy Movement's resident framing and messaging expert, David Brodwin. And hang on, David, I'm just turning to your bio here. Well, he's a co-founder of the American Sustainable Business Council. I think I've already bragged that he's on our executive committee and chairs the messaging and framing work at NEN. And he was previously the executive director of George Lakoff's Rockridge Institute, which is where he got his chops in framing and messaging. And he currently writes a weekly column on economic issues for the U.S. News and World Report and teaches social change at the Golden Gate University in San Francisco. Thank you very much. And Alan?
I'm recovering from my night in the dormitory, which took me back, painfully took me back about 40 years or so to the mattresses that I knew and loved so well. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Sarah, for moderating today. I'll be brief with my words. I don't want to read the word for word here, the principles. You can read them. They're in Spanish, I believe, as well, aren't they, for if there's Spanish-speaking people in the audience. So basically, we went about this business with an eye toward creating a kind of beacon or compass for this movement, this incipient movement that Bob Massey so eloquently described downstairs a few minutes ago. We thought that it is a very diffuse, very disparate movement. There's parties that are activities, organizations that are very localistic in nature. There's others that are more global in nature. There's some people working in human rights, others in sustainable agriculture. So this movement is a movement that is new, of course, and whether it's a bona fide movement like women's suffrage at this point, we hope it will be, and we hope it'll have the same outcomes of major social change. At the same time, we don't have to stand by and twiddle our fingers and wait for cohesion to occur. We can proactively steward cohesion or convergence, shall we say, around a core set of principles. We thought if we can do that, then at least we'll create beginning to create some singularity, some cohesiveness, some harmonization among these various efforts, and it will give people a language and a touchstone to refer to as they go about their individual activities as organizations, as individuals, and so forth. So I'm doing XYZ in Montana, or I'm doing something in Arizona, or I'm doing something in Chile. How does it fit? How compatible with a set of principles is this activity? What can I take forward in my strategy, my vision, that will align with a set of principles, and therefore bring over time, wherever people happen to be, whatever activities they're involved with, it'll bring a kind of coming together around a shared vision. And that's really what we tried to do here. The process was, as Sarah described it, basically a very iterative process that took 12 months. It's remarkable when you try to commit to brevity and succinctness, the time it takes to get there is longer than if you commit to a 25-page document that's elaborate and detailed. Every word was discussed, debated, revised, modified. We had many different views on how this should be formatted, how it should look, how it should feel. Some argued for a much longer document, perhaps with short principles, but then 2, 3, 4 paragraphs of explication of what exactly Principle 3 meant. Others said, no, keep it short, keep it simple, keep it memorable, keep it digestible, so that think of it more as the 10 Commandments or the Bill of Rights or the core labor conventions, all of which are basically one-liners, more or less, rather than a magnum opus with great detail. And not that that couldn't follow and probably should follow, but as a start, as a launch mechanism, keep it short and simple and memorable. And so people can almost, with a little bit of rehearsal, recite these principles and carry them with them in their pocket or in their heads and make them a part of the language and part of the culture of the new economy movement. So we decided to err on that side of brevity. And what you're reading in front of you is indeed very brief. The structure is straightforward. There's a preamble, which refers to the problem we face about unsustainable, unfair, unstable, and undemocratic processes and systems and institutions. We put forward a couple of lines regarding where we want to go to correct, reverse the 4 uns, if you will, unsustainable, unfair, unstable, undemocratic, and turn the world around, to be so bold, as to create a resilient, inclusive, fair, just, and resilient society in the future. So that was by way of preamble. That all sets the stage. What follows then are 10 principles. And the key words are fairly straightforward. That none of these, recognize none of these are particularly new or path-breaking. When we had Gus Speth read this and David Korten, we tried to digest and assimilate those issues. We stuck to 10. Some said, hey, you need 15. Others said, actually, 5 is enough. Who knows? This is not a divinely delivered number here.
There's no burning bush.
Yeah, there's no burning bush, right? A few burning tempers, but no bush. So we learned from all these terrific thinkers who were, as Sarah mentioned, in the working group here, from Gus and David and John Cavanagh and the rest of them. And we tried to search out commonalities and distill this good thinking into a set of principles. And I have to say, at this moment in time, the world is awash with principles. If any of you in the Rio process, there's something called the People's Treaties. I don't know if you've seen that. There's about 15 treaties. Almost every treaty, this is a kind of an NGO movement, all have their principles. Corporation 2020, near and dear to my heart. We have our 6 principles for corporate redesign. And of course, Gus and David Korten, they had their own principles in their writings. In fact, we heard a bit of it from it yesterday. And there's a new international group out of Brazil called the Global Union for Sustainability. It has its principles. Principles are plentiful, right? Our challenge was to steer our discussion in a way that would bring the principles focused on the economy, but not lose sight of the fact that the reality, of course, that we all know and that we all try to push back on, which is the isolation of the economy. The economy is just a part of a larger system, a societal system, an ecological system, and it needs to be the handmaiden, not the dictator of the way we think and do and act in the world. So this was a tremendous balancing act, day after day, month after month. And finally, last March, I guess, yeah, thanks to Sarah's stewardship and a lot of readiness to kind of end at least this phase of the process, we came up with these 10. Now, I won't read all these 10, but just in short, they tried to be comprehensive. Again, they tried to be succinct. They tried to speak to various dimensions, various perspectives on what a new economy would look like, and try to create a set of normative statements, essentially, of what is the nature of this new economy, what might it look like, where must it need to go 5, 10, and 20 years from now. So that's the basic background of these principles, and I'm sure we can discuss. I hope we don't wordsmith in our Q&A session, because, but certainly opinions as to glaring errors and unacceptable assertions would be welcome. Thank you. We had the good fortune, I guess it was actually a chance encounter. The feedback process? In New York, right? Between Soledad and...
Well,
sure. We had the good fortune, I guess it was actually a chance encounter. Semi-chance encounter. Anyway, so I've known Soledad for many years and through other mechanisms when I spent time in Chile with the Global Reporting Initiative. So anyway, we got to know each other there. But then I've known Soledad happily and fortuitously a name came up, and this connection through Sarah, and then I got involved and so forth. But we thought, now, this is an opportunity. We writing fortuitously, a name came up, and this connection through Sarah, and then I got involved and so forth. But we thought, now, this is an opportunity. Are we writing these? Who are we writing these for? Is this just a U.S. operation? How will they resonate or not resonate in the case of a significant emerging economy? I mean, the new economy is, you know, if it has legs, it should be something of keen interest to everywhere from Zimbabwe to Chile to Mozambique. Okay, so she, as you'll hear, challenged us to think about: are we writing something that, in fact, does resonate for an emerging economy? And if not, should we tweak it, correct it? What's the feedback? What's the learning that can go on here?
I'm going to stand up because I don't speak very loud. Well, I would like to excuse me because I'm going to be reading, but I want to do my best with my pronunciation, so that's the reason of I'm not going to be speaking without the paper. As Alan said, we know each other for a while, and they asked me, and I work with a group of people in Chile, looking or reading the 10 principles and see if this makes sense. But more than like an emerging economy, which is one of the points, also is to make sense as a human being of part of the world. And if these 10 principles make sense, because finally I think all of us are part of this world. So let me give you my comments and what I think, we think, because it's with a group of people about this 10 principle. One of the reasons, as I said, it was because I belong to emerging economy. For this reason, my first reflection is, should my comment be thought considering that I belong to an emerging economy or better to an emerging country? In this sense, I prefer to reflect from the framework of my life experience belonging to an emerging country, not an emerging economy, because this broadens the spectrum of the economic and social development analysis based on which I reflect, and the way how the two of them interlace, pointing to an analysis from the complexity theory. Therefore, my main reflection is oriented that classifying this principle in the frame of new economy is restrictive, because it fails to recognize the diversity among different cultures, the levels of development, the geographic location, the history of independence and dependence, and the influence of the elite groups in different countries of the world, among others. It is true that the 10 principles, the principle of the new economy, consider the serious flaws of the economy, as Alan said, being unsustainable, unfair, unstable, and undemocratic. In other words, they open up the analysis paradigm to allow understanding what economic development is. Nevertheless, the prevailing model for the relationship of developed countries towards the emerging countries and the model for development for each country in the world show a restrictive understanding for the term economy itself. So the first proposal, in spite of being totally in agreement with the principle of a new economy, I don't know whether it is prudent calling it economy, because it has a conceptual load of meaning from which it cannot be detached. Economy means unsustainable, unfair, unstable, and undemocratic. But even more for the economies of emerging and non-emerging countries, it also means oppression, discrimination, political power, corporation power that has undermined the developing society. If we also add that the present economy model, it has been a painful meaning for humanity at large, much more after the events in 2008 at the present events. That is to say, economy means exclusions and unfairness. I think adding the word new does not provide it enough authenticity and truthfulness to believe it will have a renewed meaning. Therefore, my second proposal is that we have to create a different feeling, a different emotionality in connection to those new principles, convening more conviction to the proposal. Maybe we have to add a last name to the new economy, like new human economy, or something that makes sense for all of us. We should produce a cultural change, a change in the relation. The model shouldn't emerge from a change in the relation. The model should emerge from the intellectual elite, because that will make it lose significance and meaning for those that are ready to work to achieve the deep change in our society. If it is born from a few, if it doesn't go through a participatory process for consent, we will be repeating that we have done before in history, imposing the vision for a few over the majority. Therefore, the great challenge of this principle is to change the paradigm of social contraction. Hence, I suggest that the meaning of the principle for a new economy in the next stage of dissemination, implementation, and ratification, which is what David is going to talk with us, should aim to transcend to become a mode of change, of contraction, of relation and social development, based on paradigms we have not practiced today. This means that we all have to change because we all have grown in alienating non-democratic models and failing
willing to consider the diversity of thinking. For that reason, we should break the paradigms of power that have dominated so many human beings in our society. With this word, I also want to say that today we are living an historical moment in which human dignity goes beyond the reflexive thinking of some, beyond public policies, and is expressed through the demands of legitimacy and dignity of every single person as a human being. In the always more interrelated society in the world, no doubt this is a radical change in the way we build a participatory and egalitarian society. In other words, human rights do not rise only from governmental agreement or from the demands to companies or from the accountability NGOs take forward. They arise from the distinctiveness of each individual for his or her desire to be recognized on their complete individual dignity. That is to say, the legitimacy of being a human being is expressed by the uniqueness of each of them and then becomes collective. And for them, I mean, one in which human beings, this process, will have access to appropriate answer facing the challenge imposed by putting in action the development of sustainable balance model in the economic and social environment variables, where we have access to a society that provides an equitable economic and social distribution, where responsible competitiveness is the axis for its implementation. Allowing stopping the present resource distribution mode where the majority of the citizens of the planet are left out. And then we might jointly shape this new way of building our society, where the promise and agreement of the last decades move towards a mode doing things oriented to action and change in a fair and a fast mode. We need fair action now for everybody. Finally, we need a radical thinking developed under uncertainty and complexity. It needs to be long-term, honest, collaborative, and strategic, based in the framework of the common good to be able to collectively build the new paradigm proposed by the principle for a new economy or the principle for the new model of sustainable human development. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning. As hard as it is to craft a statement of principles like this, the really hard thing is to get them to work, and to get them to be adopted in the public debate, right? As Ellen said, the world is awash in principles, and yet the world is still a very unprincipled place. So we've got a gap we need to address. What I'd like to talk to you about here is to emphasize why it is so important to take a statement of principles like this and really move it forward, and really move it out to the media and out to the political community and out to the grassroots. Because this is a very, very important part of movement building, and we all have to understand that, even as we may want to provide feedback, even as these words are not necessarily your favorite words, even if we have more revision to do. What we want to do is get together and do that so that we can move this out into the world. So there are three reasons why this is important. And it's about how we talk to the media. It's about how we talk to power, political power or corporate power. And it's about how we talk to each other, different organizations in the movement. So let me touch on each of those. First of all, the media. If a New York Times reporter came to this meeting and stuck a microphone in front of each of us and said, "What is the new economy movement?" I suspect that reporter would get as many answers as there are people in the meeting. So when that reporter then goes out to file the story, what are they going to say? They're going to write a story about a bunch of well-meaning but confused people who want to see change in the world, but they're not quite sure what that change is. And isn't that, in fact, exactly the meme that's been put out around Occupy, right? Now, when our fuzzy, amorphous, not quite crisped up story collides with the super well-refined, honed, free market narrative that they've spent 30 years crafting and honing and smoothing, guess what story wins? That's why we have the world we have. So we have to have a succinct and powerful and clear way to say what the new economy movement is about. And we have to all say it, because that consistency and that repetition is what gets the media to understand and tell the story that we want told, as opposed to the story that is being told about us. So let's move to number 2, talking to power. Suppose we're all on Capitol Hill and we're in a senator's office. Senator says, "Why are you here?" "We're here for a new economy." "Well, what's that about?" And again, the same difference of views. Now, a senator or representative or anyone in that kind of position is a giant averaging machine. They're hearing thousands of conversations, and they're looking for the common patterns. So if they hear 1,000 different things, they don't feel any need to act. There's no consensus building in their community. The people aren't clear what they want, so we're going to continue to see business as usual. But if people can see that there's clarity and unanimity among the populace, then we have a very different conversation. Then they think, oh, something is brewing. My constituents are upset. My constituents want to see specific changes in the world, and then we start to get change. Now, one of the challenges of us all being smart and verbal and engaged people is we get bored saying the same thing over and over again. Okay? But saying the same thing over and over again is what works. By the time you've said 100 times, by the time you are completely bored with the way you're saying it, by the time your head is about to explode, that is about the moment when people in Washington are starting to understand that maybe there's something that needs to be listened to. So consistency is really, really important. And the third issue is about building alignment among our groups. We all come from very different backgrounds. We represent different groups, different interests, different causes. We all have different priorities. And yet, we know systemically all of those causes are connected, and that is why we're here this weekend. But we have to keep those connections in mind as we go out of here tomorrow afternoon and as we go back to our work on Monday morning. We got to keep those connections in mind. We have to remember what we share. We have to remember why we came here, and we have to remember why we need to work together to build something that's really important. We cannot afford to forget the broader framework here. If we want a planet that sustains life, if we want an economy where people, regardless of their background or their circumstances, have an opportunity to develop themselves and contribute, we can't afford to forget. We need principles to help us maintain alignment in the work we do, and so we see the bigger picture and we continue to work together for the bigger picture. So this set of principles is a starting point, but it's not just words on the page. It's a living, dynamic thing that helps us move, helps us put the movement forward. We need to do something with this. We need to put it on our t-shirts. We need to put it on our websites. We need to put it into the form of sign-ons where we get public commitments and we ask for public commitments. Just think, for example, of the power of the Norquist tax pledge and how that has completely transformed Washington. We need to do stuff like that. We need to put it out in the media and do it consistently. But most importantly, we need to put this in our hearts, because this is what guides us, and this is what gives us strength, and this is what gives us hope. And if we do that, we have taken a gigantic step forward in creating the world that we want to see. Thanks.
Well, I just wanted to ask a few clarifying questions before I turn it over to the audience. What time is it? How many minutes do we have left in the session? 15. Okay, very, very quickly. Alan, when we talked about the feedback process, I just want to clarify that it wasn't just that this group of people wrote the principles and then said, hey, you guys, this is what the new economy movement means. There actually was about a 5-month process between November and March where we posted the principles on 5 or 6 different listservs and websites, and we collected actually quite detailed feedback from at least 100 individuals and organizations who responded to the principles. And then the editors reviewed all that feedback. And I would say we classified that feedback into 3 categories. We had some feedback that challenged the premises of the principles, much closer to where Soledad is coming from. Can we just talk about the economy? Do we have to talk about, ethics and law and culture and political systems? Or can we talk about the economy as a separate field and create principles for the economy, was one question. Is it the right name, the new economy, is another question, a kind of branding question. These were kind of meta questions that were questioning, in fact, the scope of the project. The second feedback we got was suggestions from a lot of people about really great ways to enact the principles. The German feed-in tariff is a great example of principle number 6, which we said, that's nice, but that's not giving us new principles. That's just telling us, examples of the principles at work. And we're hoping to continue collecting all those great ideas about the principles at work as a next step of this project. And then the final feedback we got was really very thoughtful and reflective feedback about the principles themselves. And that feedback, I think, was integrated into the document, was rewritten, and many of those suggestions were adopted. So I just want to make it clear that it wasn't just this team of people that were involved in the creative process.
My name's Gwendolyn Hall-Smith. I'm the planning director for the city of Montpelier, and the author of Creating Wealth, which is a book about complementary currencies and the problems with the monetary system. And I'd just like to applaud their efforts, because I think the 4 U's they've identified are really key problems with the system, and I think that the principles are great. My only question, and a bit of a criticism of the document, has to do with the one about taming finance. Because the monetary system really does provide the basis for all of the economic transactions that we make. And your emphasis on resilience is really important, but there's nothing in here that explicitly talks about diversifying finance as well as taming it. You sort of hint at it when you talk about all monetary systems, implying that there might be more than one, which is all we have now. And the one that we have now is part of what causes the concentration of wealth and power. It's part of what causes the system to not be resilient, because as soon as the banking system goes south, the entire economy goes south. What we really need is more diversity in the type of exchange mechanisms, stores of value, and units of account that we use. And I think so taming and diversifying, that isn't wordsmithing, that's actually really getting at the heart of what will make these principles resilient.
Okay, Philip Vergacht, Tellus Institute, and some other things. I love these principles, but they don't touch the emotion, right? And I was looking for people, and I saw in principle 8, it's about individuals. It's about institutions, it's about governments, it's about all the abstract things. So one thing I would like to see some principles around the human aspects of the economy. And maybe it is because it is economy. I'm not an economist. That's how economists think. But it should really be principles for a new human economy. And the second point is that I'm also an organizer of sustainable consumption research networks. And we are all consumers. We are all part of the consumerist society. But we as consumers are not addressed, not in the principles, and also not very much in this conference. And then my last point is that I'm also a scholar of technological innovation studies. Technology is all around us. And technology is actually the biggest creator of wealth and power and big corporations. And I think that principles of new economy should have something to say about technology and how to tame technology for human users. Thank you.
Len Raymond. See if I can be short. I like how well engineered it is, and I think there's a tendency to appeal just to the engineering impulse in society. There's also the anarchist impulse and the leadership impulse. I think if instead of those being principles, those were metrics, that would work fabulously. I generally feel it will not succeed as principles.
Hi, I'm Lisa Renstrom with Eco America. When they handed out the blue cards and they asked, what most strategically could you do, my answer was to have everyone in this audience agree upon a master narrative that they can share, evangelize, sing about, and I was sitting next to Peter Barnes, and he wrote something about in a crisis, and so then I added to the bottom of my blue card, so that when the crisis hits, we are there with the master narrative that Americans will rally around. So it's so great to come in and say, oh, well, here it is. But I would agree with Philip. This does not make your heart sing in any way. And so if these same principles, you know, that have been crafted so carefully and beautifully by you all, if you could do the version B that makes your heart sing, that causes Americans, both conservatives and progressives, I would conjure, to come together around a new economy. And maybe it's not new because conservatives have trouble with newness. But what, and then I would also just suggest that in today's world, some surveys and focus groups and other kinds of research to really understand what works for the audience that you want to focus on could be very useful.
Kevin Hyde, I'm a private citizen, which is to the core of my comment, my feedback. I encourage, there's been an assumption, I've heard it in a number of speakers, that everyone's affiliated in this room. I'm not. And I represent, I think, an untold mass who isn't affiliated, who needs a framework. My heart is singing because I know I'm not alone. I see a framework up there that I can take into this, I can take into my experience, which I hope I can bring to bear. And with that framework, I feel there's something I might be able to do. I might have a hope because I'm not alone. So as you nitpick, and I work under contract for the federal government, wordsmithing sucks. I've been there, you have to do it. But as you do it, please remember that there are people out there ready to do something, and don't get caught in your head. Please don't get caught in your head. That's my passion, and I want you to have those discussions. Don't get confused about why you're doing it. Why, and I will say this now, why we are doing. I haven't got a clue what I'm going to do yet, but there's all sorts of people out there ready to do something, and that's why these principles are essential. It doesn't matter if they morph. That's why we have a Constitution. God knows it's been corrupted, but that's why we have a Constitution. It's supposed to live.
Hello, I'm Kerstin Annadotter from the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. I just have a question to you all. I think these principles are great, and as I understand it, it's a starting point. But I want to take back to my colleagues the information that I get here from you all, and I want to ask are these principles, are you all the New Economics Foundation, the New Economics Institute, the New Economics Network, are you all agreeing on these principles?
Gary Flomenhoff from the Gun Institute. Not a comment on the principles, but I don't know your name. David, just comment on what you said. One of your comments was talking about how the opposition has honed their message for 30 years. And you said that's why we have the world we have. And that's only partly true. The other reason is they spent billions of dollars and they outspend us by 1,000,000 to 1. So that's the other reason. And you also mentioned the Norquist tax pledge. That's backed up by blackmail. If they don't sign it, they spend millions against their opponent to throw them out of office. So give us a little credit. It's not just they have it's not just that they have a better message. That's all I'm saying. It's not that they have a better message.
Right.
Okay. Right. I just want to make that clear.
I just want to, Ellen Kaler from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, I just want to echo some of the sentiments here about having some addition and things that Soledad said, having some more heart. And when I think about the existing economy that we have, the conservative economy, the old-fashioned economy, to me, the underpinnings of that are based on fear, isolation, despair, scarcity and quantity. And I think what we all want is an economy that's based on the foundation of care and feeling, that human connection, belonging, hope, abundance, and playing on our gifts that we each have to bring, and more a sense of quality in our lives.
Peter Neal, World Ocean Observatory. I just have one comment. I hope it's not wordsmithing, but when I look at the two principles at the bottom, the fully realize and protect and nurture, it seems to me that 8 or 9 out of these reflect the first one, but not the second one. And so really when you start talking about protect and nurture the richness and resilience of the natural world, only number 2 directly confronts that. And it seems to me that by using the word limits, you are denying the synergistic realities of nature and what it can teach us, and models built on the wisdom of nature, not in some amorphous way, but in actually demonstrable ways, which, for example, natural systems may defy your premise about subsidiarity, because in fact they are integrated over long periods and geographical spaces. So it seems to me that you have sort of left the model and experience that nature has to show us how to behave in the modern world out of the equation, or it should be more emphasized in the equation. And I think that, by the way, will speak to the messaging opportunities, because people will understand that differently than they'll understand economic responses and some of these other issues. Thanks.
Well, just 1 or 2 brief comments. I want to thank you all for the feedback. It's really not only rich, but remarkably efficient, which our process has been struggling with. So thank you very much, really. And so one key message I take away is that touch the human heart. In other words, if we can think of a next version that in its front end, not speaking to the specific principles, those can continue to be crafted, but in the front end, if we can evoke the kind of intensity, if you will, intense emotion of documents like the introduction to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the introduction, not the specific rights, the Declaration of Independence in the United States, or the Gettysburg Address, for that matter, by Lincoln. I mean, these are burned in the memory, in the heads of not just Americans, but many people around the world. So I think we can do a better job of that, sounding less sort of mechanistic and maybe even robotic in the front, and gather our emotions there, or kindle the emotions there, and then tweak with all these very valuable substantive points on the principles, go forward and do the appropriate modifications. We don't, just to be clear, we can't have principles that version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 that morph, that change every 3 months. I mean, then that's bad news, because we won't achieve the kind of singularity and consistency of messaging that David so eloquently described. So we have to be careful about too many revisions too often, but be open to sensible and judicious revision.
Well, thank you for the opportunity of being here. And just to say, and maybe insist, that it's true they had to be more emotional, but I think we don't have to forget that we are human beings, that we reflect, and we have a conscience that allow us making a difference with all the species in the world, that we are able to think of what we are doing, think and relate that with us as human beings. So I think we have to call to the wisdom of our ancestral heritage, and I think we have the answers there. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll just acknowledge I've been called out on a couple of my oversimplifications here. I tried to do a 5-minute intro to framing and messaging and the importance of all this, and it's really a much longer subject. So I would welcome any further discussion with any and all of you about the broader context in which all this occurs. Other than that, I'll just express deep gratitude for the tremendous feedback and wonderful support and ideas, and we will take that all to heart as we go on with this and craft a newer, better version. So thank you all.
I just finally want to say that for me, as the coordinator of the New Economy Network, this is really an example that we can work together across our organizational boundaries, across the institutional silos, when we have a shared and common objective, and we can create things that benefit all of us in the movement, and just how important it is to have the capacity to find spaces where we can pull together and create the infrastructure, the vision, that we all need to move forward. So I'm very grateful to the working group. And I just also wanted to add the detail that the budget for this project was zero. This was all done with volunteer time and energy. So thank you all for coming.